Okay guys, so if you like the sound of that intro there, that's what we're going to be going through today. I'm going to take you through the different sections. This is just, I was experimenting with some trap hi-hats today, trying to improve my production on that. And this is just a little sort of demo that I built around that. Of course, things work better in context. So I created myself a nice little context here. If you like the sound of this, and this is beyond your production level, then stay tuned. We're going to cover all the stuff that I've done in here. We'll see how much detail we get into, but hopefully everything you're hearing now I'm going to cover. So let's get straight into it. So I'm going to work my way from the bottom up here. So first off, most important element in this style of music, I don't really know what we'd call this genre-wise, but sort of trap, hip-hop, urban, very un-me. This is not really something I normally do. My production background's more in the pop realm. Which we'll get to in a second actually, because there's some things here which aren't very authentic, and I'm sort of aware that they're not, but it's just my preference. Other thing to say is everything we're going to be talking about here, just to keep the levels nice and even, we are running through the mastering chain here as well, but I'll cover that at the same time. So here is the 808. Okay, so obviously the genre here really heavily relies on 808. 808, for people who don't know, was, still is, a Roland drum machine, TR-808. When we say 808 in a production context, we're actually more specifically referring to the tuned kick drum sound, which is what you've just heard there. Now, everything I'm going through today here, I'm using Logic, obviously. It doesn't really matter what software you're using. Most of it's just free with Logic that I'm using today. This particular one's one of the few exceptions though. I'm using Arturia Analog Lab. I just got myself one of the keyboards and this software came free with it. So if you buy anything from Arturia, which can be very reasonably priced, this keyboard was less than £150 and I got the software with it, which by itself costs 150 quid. But there's a nice patch in here called 808 Boom, which uses the Mini, it's a Mini Moog. Now, fortunately, I own the Mini, so I'm able to sort of customize it slightly more. I've messed around with it a little bit, added a tiny bit of white noise, messed around with the filters a little bit. It's essentially just a nice sub bass. Dirty. Then I ran that through an overdrive. This overdrive plugin, this is one of my go-to plugins on Logic. It's just absolutely amazing. It's, you know, even if I'm not adding drive to anything, I'll use the tone. Now I am adding drive here quite a lot at 12 dB. Everything in this genre is about being really sort of gritty and urban, so you can never really go too far. You're going to hear if you've gone too far distortion-wise. If it starts sounding like distortion, you've probably overdone it. If it sounds like you're running hot out of an analog, in this case an analog drum machine, then you know you've got it right. And I've got the tone roll up to about 770 Hertz. This isn't a cutoff, well, it's a very subtle cutoff, probably about 6 dB slope or something like that. But if I put this back up, you hear that top end there. I'm just trying to get rid of that, so about there. Then I'm running it into a compressor. Now, I'm not using the compressor as a compressor here. I'm using the compressor for sidechain compression coming from the kick drum. Now, like I said, I come more from a pop music background. In particular, I first got into production listening to sort of house pop and guys like Swedish House Mafia, progressive house, Tiesto, that sort of thing. That was my bag. So I always overdo the sidechain because that's a stylistic component of those musical genres. But here, what I'm doing, just to talk you through the way I sidechain, I'll talk you through it on the 808 and then I'll just refer to it later, but I won't go into too much detail. How I do it is, first of all, in case you're not sure what sidechaining is, sidechaining means that when I get the kick, well, let's hear it. When I get the kick, you see every time the kick plays, this needle moves. Now what this needle represents is the volume of my 808, which means every time the kick plays, my 808 volume gets reduced. If you've got two sounds, especially if they're competing in the same frequency range, so 808 and kick are both low instruments, when the kick plays and the 808 stays at the same volume, it can become muffled. So when the kick plays, the 808 gets dropped, and you just hear the kick very briefly, and then the 808 comes back up. Now you can do it very subtly, so you don't even hear this happening, or you can do it so that the 808 pumps, or whatever you're sidechaining, pumps in time. And that's sort of the approach I go for. So the way I set it up is, first of all, top right in Logic here, the sidechain instrument 2 is my kick, you can see there. So what I do, all these things across the top here, they're just different styles of compression. For now, I'm just sticking with Platinum Digital. It did the job. It's just a surgical operation, this. It's not really for tonal reasons. And first thing I do is I always crank the ratio full. I always go right up to the full, and I pull the threshold all the way down. And you see it's completely overdoing it here. Then I'll put my release all the way down as well. And I'm just setting the attack here. So what I want from the attack, this is how quickly the volume gets pulled down. Now, that's too slow for my liking, so I'm liking it about there. Then next up, I use the threshold here. Now, you could think when you're sidechaining, I think of the threshold almost like a mix between the two instruments. So at the minute, the kick is winning in the sidechain. Now, as I start to turn up, you hear we're getting more of the low end, more of the bass synth. So I like it about there. Next up, I pull the release all the way up. And you see how slow the needle's moving now. Now, it's worth saying at this point, I'm talking about what you can see. Now, you might not have Logic. I don't do this by seeing, I'm using my ears. But you can see the visual representation in this instance, the needle move very slowly. So I want the... So I don't want it returning to full volume too soon, too fast. Otherwise, I want it to have a sort of musical feel to it. I like it about that. Finally, I pull the ratio down, reduce the ratio, which is the amount of sidechaining happening, until, so for example, there's no sidechaining happening there. I'm just pulling it down until I like the amount of bounce happening. So that's about right. Now, I might have ended up with completely different settings to what I started with. All the different controls work, they work on one unique thing, but you can have them all set differently and still end up with a similar result. So we'll be able to see in the screenshot here how much I've changed that, but I'd fiddle with this for ages until I end up with it where I want it. So let's move on. Okay, so next up, we've got here let's look at the hi-hats, okay, the trap hi-hats. So, sorry if you can hear my laptop going crazy, by the way. It's struggling with Logic and screen recording. So hi-hats, not my specialty. Like I said, that's the reason I was working on this track today. I was just wanting to work on my hi-hat. So I just want to talk you through some of the stuff I came up with here. So if we open this up in the MIDI editor, you see there's quite a lot going on here. This is all just one hi-hat sample changed to different pitches, okay? So if I just play this as an instrument here. So you hear there's pitch to that. And so that's the first thing I'm changing, rather than just going and staying on one sample over and over again. There's a few things happening, so I know that you can hear the pitch slightly changing there. That's because of some of the plugins I've put on. But without the plugins, it would just be the same sound over and over again. So that's the first thing that I wanted to change. So I'll tell you what, let's hear it before I put any plugins on that. Okay, so the reason I started working on this was I had a sample. I'll see if I can quickly find that for you. No, don't know where it is. But I found a sample which had these lovely trap hats on, and I realised that I didn't really know how to get that lovely crispy sound. Whenever I tried this sort of thing before, it ended up sounding like this project currently is. It's like, musically it's doing the right thing, but it just sounds heavy-handed. So, here's a few of the things that I've done to improve it. Like I said, still not an expert, but I might, after today, know a bit more than you, and if that's the case, then I hope this will help. So the first thing is velocity. So I've got all sorts of different velocities. Each of these little pins here is a different level from bottom to top. So some you see are getting quite loud, and some are pretty quiet. So that keeps a nice bounce to it. The second thing is musically, all the roll things are just notes in a row, but you'll notice I've put them as different pitches rather than having the same note 4 times in a row, which can sound a bit robotic. We have that sort of sound. Not a huge change in pitch on those, but it's not the same sample played over and over again. Then I've also got here some pitch bend information to amplify those, which means that as those notes are falling, they're falling more. Here, these are a good example. Pretty subtle, this, but they are. So you hear da 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 da, very subtle, but it's changing. Then we've got bend up for those 4. I was just messing around here, like I said, those 4 notes are going to naturally fall. You see the pitch goes down. So I thought, why not have the automation of the pitch going up at the same time? Then these all fall here. The ending, big fall. And then the other thing I've automated is the pan here. So you see these are going, during these 4 notes, we're going all the way from left to right. All the way from right to left for these, and I'm just mucking about with those. So experiment with some different pan things. You'll hear that better if you've got headphones on. All the way there. Okay, so still doesn't sound great, but that's the programming. Now, it starts to spice up a bit when we get into the plugins. So the first plugin was some distortion. Now, when I say the first plugin, I didn't actually originally use that first. What I did first was put the EQ in, and I just didn't feel there was enough high end. So this EQ is ridiculous, as you can see. There's a cut at 6,500 hertz, so we're at 6.5K, getting rid of everything below that. these trap hi-hats, something I've noticed is that they're all just ridiculously high frequencies. It's more like you feel them rather than really hear them. If you are someone who's quite visual when you hear music, you won't be able to like see the hi-hats. It's just like the air around the hi-hats. I don't know if that makes any sense, but that's the way I think about sounds. So here we have that now. There just wasn't enough high frequencies there, so I wanted to add some more high frequencies, and that's what distortion is for. It adds upper harmonics. So you've got a lot more information there. Then started to get a little bit in your face, a little bit aggressive, but I liked the amount of high frequencies, so I softened it with a phaser. Now, what a phaser does is really help widen out the sound. So although we've got all these sort of panning effects happening here, this makes it a little bit more wishy-washy and stops those really aggressive frequencies being quite so sore on the ears. And it really adds like a metallic element as well. But all of a sudden it now sounds really, well, to me anyway, it sounds really interesting. I think that sounds really cool. It really brings out those high frequencies without them being too overly aggressive. And then finally, compression here, side chaining as well. So every time the kick goes, or again, I'll get the kick up. Gee, I'm really reducing it there, but it's pretty fast attack and release on that. So it's only that exact second that the kick, well, less than a second, that the kick kicks, that we're really losing any high frequencies. I just really wanted the kick to come through. Like I said, that's from a sort of house music background where the number one thing is the kick. It's not quite as important in sort of urban genres, but it's still an important thing for us to be able to get our kick out. Okay, so let's just refresh our memory of what the whole track sounds like with those stuff. Okay, so something you'll be able to notice, which is hugely important in urban genres, is the washy pad stuff happening in the background. I'm going to play that again. I'm going to mute the things that I've just mentioned there, the washy pad stuff. I'm going to mute it, and hopefully you're going to hear that there's something significantly missing now. So it's still got that nice groove and the nice rolls and things happening, but it's missing depth. Now, if I put those back in, imagine if, in fact, just before I put them back in, I'm going to play that one more time. Try and see where the instruments are in your mind's eye. Think how far away they are from you, where the background of the room is, and all that stuff. So there's some nice spatial information there. But most of the drums are pretty in your face. Now, we do want the drums in our face, but the production as a whole needs to have more depth to it. So we start adding these weird sort of whiny synth sounds. Let's have a little listen to these by themselves. That's not. Okay, so what have we got here? Well, let's start with this first one. Now, this was actually, it says here, Chinese flute. Chinese flute is just one of the Logic instruments. I knew I wanted something high, but not like piercing. So what I did, let's listen to what this sounded like originally. Awful. So I'm going to maybe just add one plugin at a time. So the first thing I did is I added an arpeggiator. No, I didn't. There we go. How do I do this? Come on. Oh, there we go. So the arpeggiator is on an 8th note triplet. Now this is still not going to sound like it did before, but let's hear how this sounds now. That's pretty cool. Okay, so next up, bit of distortion. This might be loud. So again, this distortion plugin is just from the same family as the overdrive plugins, but I wanted a bit to really destroy this sound. So 22 dB, cut off at 220 hertz. And again, this is just a very gradual slope. It's not massive cut off. I don't know how accurate this visual representation is here, but let's say that it's correct. That would still take us up to about 2K before we lose everything. So with that, next up is a reverb plugin. This is just a Logic stock plugin. This isn't anything special. It looks special though. It looks great. Look at this. That's 100% wet. Strange room. So I pulled that all the way up to 100% there because I just wanted the wash. I didn't want the flute anymore. I'm trying to destroy this sound so that people don't go, oh, that's a flute. Next up, EQ. Now this is just a single band. There was too much high end in that for me, so I've added this EQ in with it, without it. So you see we're starting to get that dark sound. Then pitch shift. So I wanted to start to turn this into more of a pad. So I wanted some more, not just frequencies, but more notes in there. So I've just added 7 semitones at about 30% there, and with it and without it. Now to my ear, that sort of opens it up. It adds a bit of width somehow. I think that's just a psychoacoustic effect, but it sounds good to me. There's sort of a granular element to it as well with the auto tune there, well, the pitch correction. Channel EQ. So this would have been when I'm EQing. It's very rare that I add frequencies. I have in this instance, but it's also not very often that I'll do too much with one EQ. So we can see here that I've actually got 2 EQs. This one's in stereo. I think, I can't remember actually, but we'll check in a second. I think the next one I did some stereo processing, but this is just, sorry, some sides processing, mid-side. This is cutting out this sort of obnoxious 500 hertz and all the low end. We've already covered our low end with the 808 and the kick. Then we've got here a little boost at 2K. With this, without it. So it's got rid of all the sort of body. It's becoming less specific, this sound, which I know is a very non-specific way to explain it, but it's become very non-specific. You can't tell what it is, you can't tell where it is in the stereo field. It's just a sort of weird whining sound, and we kept on going with that. Next, with the second channel EQ, you'll see here this is sides only, this one. So this means that it's only, this looks pretty savage as processing, but this is only happening in the sides. The middle information is exactly the same as the last plugin. So the middle information doesn't see this plugin at all, okay? So all I'm doing here is trying to add some width by boosting the high end in the outside. The low end, we don't need low end in, or we don't need too much low end in our left and right channels. We just want that in the center. So here's with it, without it. So again, it's just adding to this non-specificness. And finally, we add our sidechain compression as well. I then did use the Sens. These are just Logic 10. I've only just got Logic 10 last week, guys. I've been using it. It's 2019, and I've been using Logic 9 until the first week of 2019. So, and I've had some good success with it in recent years. It's not that it was outdated. It was that I needed to finally update my operating system, and Logic 9 only went up to El Capitan, I think. but I stayed on it for ages, and I finally coughed up the money for Logic 10. So these, it seems to automatically, maybe it doesn't, or maybe there's a way to switch this off, I don't know, I'm still new to it, but it sets up a couple of reverb buses already. So we've got a bathroom there, which I'll just think of that as a room. I'm sending that a tiny bit, and bus 2 here is a large hall, 4-second hall there. So all of the flute processing sounds like this. If you can hear it ducking there, that's because it still hears the kick even when we don't. You can see it ducking here. So that's the flute. The next thing, I'll get to the lead in a second. In fact, I'll do the lead now. The lead, I just wanted some more melody stuff happening. I wanted also to slightly outline the harmony, so the melody notes are sort of more like a broken chord. So I can't even remember what the basic instrument was for this one. How do I find out here? Oh, this was just a sine wave. I think. Let's just switch everything off and hear it. Again, warning, this might suddenly be very loud. So that's a sine wave. Everyone has access to this sound. If you're not sure what a sine wave is, open any synth you own and choose the one that looks like the letter S. Okay, that's this sound. Sounds pretty hip hop. Sounds pretty ghetto. So just like me. Next up, I added a Space Designer. Again, trying to add a bit of depth to that. Now, already here, we've got a sort of David Guetta type sound. Like I say, I'm trying to move away from that sort of thing. So whenever I accidentally do that sort of thing, I'll deliberately destroy it more. So if you know, like Sexy Bitch by David Guetta, that starts with do 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 do, that sort of sound. Next up, tape delay. So I was using this less as a delay and more for its tape character. So here I've just added a bit of distortion. And what else have I done here? A bit of flutter and a bit of modulation. I know this looks like I've taken distortion away, 6 dB, but this is the point at which it starts to clip. So without that, yeah, there is still some delay on that, which is why you're hearing the width increasing, but very small amount. Next up, I'm aware I'm sort of taking up lots of time here, guys, so I'll hurry. Oh, well, surprise, surprise, there's my overdrive with it, without it. Right, so when I'm rich and famous in the future, guys, if you want to sound like me, you'll know it'll be the Logic 10 plugin. That's you guys can get that inside a trade secret first. Pitch shift. So I think I'll have done. Oh, okay. So I've added an octave to this one. Again, if I just want to add more frequencies, but I want it to sound a bit more processed. Rather, I mean, of course, I could just put the notes in an octave higher. I could just draw them in MIDI data, but it doesn't have the same effect with it without it. It just adds a sort of granularness. So if you're wanting to play big chords, but they sound too clean, then you can try just adding it with pitch shifting, rather than adding another oscillator with different. Sorry, I reached the time limit now. If you're wanting something to sound, to add notes, but you want to sound more granular. So if you want something to sound more granular, then pitch shift's a good way of doing that. Okay, next up is my channel EQ. So again, mainly cut here rather than boost. Always cut rather than boost, especially if you don't have a very good, well, if you don't have a good EQ. I'm currently saving up for the new Fab filter. Like I say, I've just spent all my money on Logic. I'm saving up for the new Fab filter, so I'm just dealing with stock EQs. And that's not to say that they're rubbish, nothing wrong with them, but they always sound better and smoother when you cut rather than boost. Having said that, I have done a little bit of a boost. Don't be afraid to boost, but if you're only boosting, then something's going wrong. I was using this EQ here to get rid of some of just the obnoxious character that I've created. So with it, without it. Okay. Again, just helps to push it back a little bit, that as well. Then I've got my side chain. Then there was a couple of frequencies still winding me up here, so I've added those. I'll cut those out here at 5K and 500 and 1K. 500 is like low obnoxious, and 1K is moderately obnoxious. 2K, between 2K and 3K is like piercing obnoxious. Okay, so well, between 2K and 5K. So if you're hearing obnoxiousness, ask yourself, is it low, medium, or high? And that's a good way to immediately find the right frequency. So here's without it, with it. Okay. So, of course, what I'm talking about here, guys, all these tips I'm giving you, this is not for, these are production tips. If someone's recorded a gorgeous acoustic guitar, you're not going to be, well, if they've recorded it well, you're not going to be doing all this destruction stuff to it. We're talking the production here. We're talking how to create these sounds. Should have really said that at the beginning. And then after this, it would all be mixed together. I've sort of done a production mix here and a production master. But if I was wanting to release this as a track, which I don't think I will, then I'd personally, if I've produced something, I'd want someone else to mix it as an extra set of ears and someone else to master it. But if I had to do it myself, then I would do that as a separate stage. I'd probably do that in Pro Tools. Okay, finally, there was still just this frequency here between 200 and 500. Also a little bit here, but less. This is a multiband compressor, which means you can compress different frequencies at different amounts, or you can compress some and some not at all. So here is with it, without it. So you can hear there, whenever it's about to get carried away, it gets pulled back in. And that was the lead. So the final pad, I noticed, I can show you here on this multimeter, these two pads here, they're very focused in this middle area. And when I played the track as a whole, I'll do that now. When I played the track as a whole, this space here, we're getting a lot of the snares happening, but there's not, when the snares aren't playing, it's pretty empty. Watch this space. You see that? So, I wanted something to go in there, and that's what whine high mid is. Again, this is just, we'll hear it first off. So it's just a whine, but it was more functional, this one. There was just a frequency gap. So let's go through this without all the plugins. I hope you're finding this interesting, guys. I know that going with and without all the plugins, I'm not going to do this for every instrument. It's just for the essential ones here. That was my sound. So again, we all have access to that sort of thing. All I did, guys, you'll notice if I go to my multimeter, I found where that frequency is. So you see, that gap I had before has now been filled. Thought, fantastic, so that's fixed, but it sounds awful. So now how can I keep it fixed? So that's the first thing, add a little arpeggio. That's helping, got activity happening there. I then added a channel EQ which cut everything that isn't that frequency, so it's suddenly going to get very quiet. Another reverb, tape delay, which you've seen. Another reverb. This one, I wanted to use a bit of this modulation. chorus, which spreads it wide and adds that tuning. This is quite a heavily mixed reverb. It's chorus. And finally, our compressor, of course. Sidechain compression. So we ended up with this. And just adding a bit of information there. Now, this isn't particularly loud in the mix, but you notice when it goes. So let's listen to the track with it, without it. Here it comes. So particularly in the first half, of course, the second half, when those lead instruments come back in, we lose it a little bit. Okay, so let's start to speed through here, guys, because I think we've talked about all the majority of the important things. So all the drums here are 808s. Let's just hear the drums. I'll get rid of the kick, actually. The 808 kick. Added some timpani from some R. Kelly style timpani. Timpani, in case you don't know, they're sometimes called kettle drums. They are big. What's copper? I think they're made of copper. Giant copper drums where you can change the pitch of them. They're a pitched drum. So this is what the timpani sounds like by itself. Oh. Okay, so it's a good way to build dynamics. Used a lot by TMS. I'm making a marker there by accident. Used a lot by TMS, who do a lot of the pop production stuff. Like I said, that's what I'm into. TMS are the boys. So all the percussion, hats, kick, some percussion. Percussion has a simple hat and that sort of side stick clave thing. All 808s. Some 808 snares. Don't always just use the same snare. Don't just have. Think of the bar, where you'd normally have a snare on 2 and 4, as a phrase in its own right. You can have a smaller one and a bigger one. Then think of the 4-bar phrase as being a phrase in its own right. So it builds up and you end up with one loud one at the end. That's where this instrument came in here, which is just called default. This is actually a metal snare. And the metal snare, have I chosen the right instrument? Yeah. No, sorry, that's the wrong instrument. Sorry. Here we go. This default here. This is metal snare. This is this. So it's a big ringing snare drum. But again, only the high frequencies you're hearing there because it's more for a reverb. I don't know what this is. I made the track. Okay, yeah, so this is a drum. This is a falling snare drum. This has a note repeater plugin on it. So what the note repeater plugin does is it plays 4 of the note at a 16th value. No reason why you would do it using a note repeater plugin rather than just drawing them in. It was just quicker. So if you don't have a note repeater plugin, don't worry, but see, by itself sounds a bit rubbish. So how did I make it sound a little bit less rubbish? Well, with automation, I panned it from left to right. A little bit, and then pitch bend. Just remember, each of these 1 notes on the screen is getting played 4 times, which is why you can hear 4. Okay, And I think that's it for drums. I haven't even, on this, like I said, I haven't really done a mix or anything. There's no drum bus. That is something I would normally do if I was mixing something. I'd run all the percussion through a bus and really, really tighten them up. But, so let's hear all the drums. I just want to touch a tiny bit more on what I said about the snares. A really good example of this, of what I'm talking about here, where I first heard this, was the first sort of famous example, Blank Space, Taylor Swift. You've got one very dry snare on beat 2. I might have this the wrong way around, I can't remember now, but it's very dry on beat 2 and very wet. We're talking about reverb here on beat 4, so it's and it's the same drum, but it changes throughout the entire song every 2 or 4 beats. So what I've gone for here, my drum loop, my snare loop, snare, clap, and then this is just an offbeat. It's a tom and a snare. So I'm not just staying on one snare because it's just a bit more boring. So we're keeping it interesting. So that's the drums. With the 808, already starts to sound quite urban. Okay, with the pads that we've already talked about, okay, so final thing, just to finish off here, guys. Well done if you've stuck this far. I just wanted to mess around with a few sort of cliches within the genre. So I picked, well, there's 3 cliches here, and then there was a sort of a little experimental thing. Here's the 3 little cliche sounds. So we've got there a lot of sort of hip-hop music in particular uses some pretty epic sounds. So choirs used every now and then, and tubular bells is something that which people use quite a lot. So tubular bells, this is, like I said, all the instruments here are stock Logic things, including the 808s, by the way. All the drums are stock Logic, with the exception of that kick. Sorry, with the exception of that sub-synth, but you can get 808 samples all over the place if you don't have access to those. So tubular bells sounds like this. So all I've done there is it was ringing on a little bit too long in the mix, so I added a noise gate which cuts it off. By itself you can really hear it, but in the mix you can't. See it here. Okay. So that's tubular bells. Then brass. Again, this is just Logic stock brass. Whatever you use, you'll have some sort of brass. They're just playing in octaves. Cool. Then I went for a sort of neo as in N-E-Y-O, not N-E-O, style saw. Chris Brown sort of thing, super saw here. Justin Bieber. Any of these guys. And then finally, I made a pad here. That's what this dead track at the bottom is here. I just chopped up the Chinese flute. I chopped that up and messed around with it in the sampler, and I came up with this sound. You'll hear it by yourself. And to me, I don't know if there's any Silent Hill players, but it sounds like when you choose something on Silent Hill when you make a selection. So I quite like that sort of gritty urbanness. It also just helped, because it came from the flutes, which were happening throughout the song, it just helps to make musically a bit more cohesive, even though really, like I said, this is just a sort of silly demo thing that I'm doing here. The brass and the bells are a little bit over the top, as is the super saw, but I did like trying to make it a bit more subtle. All four of these go through a bus, and the bus here is where the side chaining is happening. So this melody is still being side chained. This is very subtle. Sort of 5 dB at most, and it's very, very quick, so you don't really hear it. And finally, in case you're interested, here's just while we're on the leads, a good tip. All four of those are sort of functioning as one melody. They're all playing the same melody. I try and think of, even though there's 4 instruments there, I think because they're all playing the melody, they are one instrument, and they're just different elements of the same sound. So a good idea when you're trying to set the levels of these, if I open the mixer here, good suggestion when you're trying to set the levels is turn each instrument up one at a time. So solo it, or I should say mute the others. And you're going to turn the volume up until you think it's loud enough that it would distract people. I'm going to say that a bit clearer. Turn it up until it's loud enough where people will think, I'm supposed to be listening to that now. And you'd be surprised how low that volume has to be. It doesn't have to be like the volume of the vocal, which of course has to be like in your face. So this here, I'll just turn it up until I think a listener's ear would be drawn to that now. It's the most important sound happening. There, 38. I don't know what it was on before, I've already forgotten, but that looks about right. And I do the same for all 4 of those parts until they were soloed at the right level. Then I can mess around with the bus volume and do the same thing. End up with that sort of mix. Okay, so final thing is, let's just talk about the mix bus. Here it is. So just a couple of EQs here happening on the mix bus. I'll show you all this, and a limiter. Right, so this EQ is first, this one here. So I'll have to keep the limiter on, otherwise you won't be able to hear it. It'll be too quiet. But the limiter is just taking off a few dB. So I had a slightly obnoxious tone at 500 Hertz, which I didn't like. I'll put that in and out that particular band by clicking here. Now, when you're doing processing on the mix bus, tiny movements make a big difference. If you can't quite hear these differences yet, it's more than likely it's probably your gear or your setup. I don't have amazing gear, I'm not in an amazing room, but I do have it well set up, and I've taught myself to hear these things now. So I do use a very nice pair of headphones, but I just use a Mixcube. I don't have a set of monitors. So I'm not using the best gear in the world. My entire monitoring rig is less than 500 quid. But set it up in a way that you can hear what you're doing. So this just pulls out a tiny bit of obnoxiousness. I always pull it down until it's definitely working and then reduce that amount. So I probably pulled it down 2 dB and then reduced it to 1. By doing that, you can still hear a difference when you pop it in and out. And then here at 3K, I wanted a very shallow boost. Now, the reason I wanted that was just to bring a tiny bit more life to the hi-hats. The actual hit of the hi-hat though, rather than the reverb after the hi-hat. Now the second one here, the same reason, this is sides only, this one. So this EQ here is only happening in the extreme left and right channel. So I'm pulling out a little bit of low end because I don't need low end out there. And pulling down that 2K frequency or that 3K frequency that I've just boosted in favour of 1 dB shelf at about 7K. So that's just slightly going to widen the mix. Something in terms of mix width, a really good tip for setting the levels of your kick drum and your bass instruments, in this case it's an 808, is turn the volume up. I'm going to demonstrate this actually. So that's the master bus. Top tip here, pro tip. Here's my 808. Mute your low instruments. So in this case, it's the kick and the 808. So if I mute those, and I'm going to really listen to how wide the mix sounds. Okay. So if you've done a half decent, it doesn't even have to be a great mix. If you've done a half decent mix, it's not just going to be dead set in the middle. It's going to have a nice bit of width to it, a bit of left and right. So let's listen to this and try and picture how wide it is. Okay, so not ridiculously wide, but there's definitely width to it. So what I would do is in this case, I'll start with my 808. I turn the volume down and I'll bring it in, just like before we were trying to think at what point does it become distracting. Well, this time we're asking at what point does it start to narrow things out and make them too narrow. Do this same exercise on all your different listening systems. So do this on your headphones and write down what level it is. Do it on any speakers you've got and decide at which point sort of a compromise between the answer of each system. So I'm just going to pull the 808 volume up until I feel that it's overpowering and it's bringing the listener's attention to the center too much. So that's obviously too loud now. So I like it about there. Might be slightly different to what I had it on before. Who knows? It might be wildly different. But you know, it's subjective and it's going to change as you come back to these things. Never finish a mix on one day. Always come back to it the next day and test it out. And I'm on the same day here, so who knows? So, I'm going to call it a day there, guys. Very well done if you stuck with me this far. I hope you found some interesting stuff there. I thought, seeing as I'd done this, I might as well share some of the things I'd come up with today, because this is not a genre I'm particularly used to, so I thought I'd share this with anyone else who's in a similar boat. If you like this, give it a like, give me a subscribe. If you didn't like it, I don't know what the hell you're still doing here. Go and do something useful. But leave any comments down below, anything you would like me to talk about, and I can do some more specific videos, some slightly shorter ones, because this was a bit rad, this one. And I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Happy New Year. Cheers.